Well, as many of you know, the Supreme Court of the United States has given the gay and lesbian community the right to wed. And frankly, it doesn't surprise me. That's simply the way America is rolling now. But the way you see it on TV, you'd think that about half America is in a gay relationship. But the truth of the matter is only about 3 to 5% of people who live in America are, in fact, in a gay relationship. Now, certainly I'm going to have somebody who's going to email me and say, it's probably a lot more than that because that's only people who declare themselves to be gay. They may very well be some who are still in the closet. But even if you double that, that's still a 6 to 9% or 6 to 10% of the U.S. population, which is basically 1 in 10 at the high mark. But what the Supreme Court has basically done is that they could not, the gay community could not win this battle by individual states. So they basically put the ball in the Supreme Court's hands to overturn the Constitution and to take the right of individual states out of their hands. You know, since the beginning of this country, it's always been the state's responsibility to define things of this nature. But time and time again, they continue. The Supreme Court seems to come to the rescue of these different special interest groups when they can't defeat individual states and the people who live in them, who simply don't want this lifestyle to be something that is tolerated in their state. But that genie is now out of the bottle and will never be put back in. In fact, you know, this is a good example of the days of Noah. And what I mean by that is that God will only, this is basically the last bastion before God destroys a world of sin. And certainly we can't look at the United States and declare them the whole world. But we have to accept the fact that the United States is a world leader in and of social issues. This is only the beginning of what will take effect in most of the Western world, if it hasn't already. And certainly in the European Union, and I'm sure Australia would be next. So I look for the U.S. to influence most of the free world, if not all, to pass legislation that will allow homosexual marriages throughout the world. So is this situation a prophetic end-time sign? Well, yes, it is. You know, when Jesus was speaking to the disciples, he said that, so as the days of Lot and also of Noah, so will be the same days of the Son of Man when he comes for his second coming. You know, who knows how long it'll be before we are living in the days of Lot. But I hope pastors around the world, and especially in the United States, will stand strong against the rulers of this world who will place a tremendous amount of pressure and possibly fines and jail time to ministers who will rebel against this new law of the land. We truly may be witnessing the true and real beginning of the end. But that's enough of that. Let's move on to what I really wanted to speak on. In a few days, the European Union and other lenders are going to make their decision on whether or not their negotiators and Greece's negotiators can come to a settlement and extend the Greek bailout. And to prevent depositors of taking out their money and transferring it out of the country, there have been some guarantees that have been put in place in order to keep depositors from just taking their money, and they don't want capital flight to be a major drain on the banking system in Greece. But despite the safeguards, many depositors are consistently withdrawing their funds from Greek banks. Many of them are in fear that Greece will eventually leave the Eurozone. But this is only the tip of the iceberg, according to the national interest, and this is what they have to say. It says, more frightening, this weakness in the system of official support leaves a potential for considerable harm should Italian, Spanish, and other depositors in Europe's periphery follow the Greek example. Even with great faith in their government's commitment to the euro, Italians, Spaniards, and others still might take their money out of local banks just to play it safe. So what they're saying is that if they're looking at what's happening in Greece, some of these other countries who are on the borderline of default themselves, this may spark a frenzy from other countries such as Italy and Spain to start taking their money out of Spanish and Italian banks to higher and safer ground. They certainly don't want to be the next to get hit if in fact both Spain and Italy have to depart from the euro. But going on with the article, says, even with great faith in their government's commitment to the euro, Italians, Spaniards, and others still might take their money out of local banks just to play it safe. There is, after all, little cost to such a move. Should such outflows gain momentum, little could be done to save these countries from a shortage of liquidity, with all the associated economic and financial harms that could go with it. These nations would then have still more trouble making good on their debt obligations, and the ECB would have to struggle still harder to support their finances. Such trends could, in the extreme, precipitate a full-blown financial crisis. Widespread concern over bank illiquidity would cause doubt about the ability of banks to fulfill their obligations. People and other institutions would then shy away from transacting any business with them, and since no one could know which firms had liquidity problems, the awareness could extend to just about all. Financial flows could then freeze up, shutting down the great amount of economic activity that depends on them. This is exactly what happened in the United States in 2007-2008, when a similar awareness developed around each firm's exposure to subprime loans. If the cause this time in Europe has different roots, the result could well be the same. And because all financial institutions in the world deal with each other, the situation would quickly spread around the globe as America's financial problems did 7 years ago. So far, there is little sign that depositors' fears extend beyond Greece. On that basis, it would seem that this frightening prospect is less than likely. And the article goes on to say that just because it's unlikely does not mean it's not improbable. That the fear and frenzy of a Greek bailout that could fail could start a chain reaction that could go global. So is there a possibility that there could be a world financial meltdown? Certainly there could be. If in fact the perfect storm did develop, there's no question about it. In fact, back in 2007, 2008, during the subprime banking fiasco in the United States, this certainly affected continents and banking and financial systems throughout the world. But it wasn't an overnight situation. This did take time. And I certainly don't expect, if this were to happen, that it would be something that would be felt immediately. As I've said in past videos, that the world banking system and the economy simply doesn't work that way. And probably our greatest enemy is going to be fear. Fear that Greece could be the first of many nations that will default on their financial obligations. And just like the stock market, when somebody gets wind that a bad earnings report is coming, investors begin to bail as quickly as possible, causing that stock to plummet. And others in associated businesses also begin to plummet, fearing that they may get hit by collateral damage. So certainly many times in the markets, it's a fear-based situation that drives these financial downfalls. In fact, in a latest poll, 72% of Americans believe that a financial collapse is imminent for the U.S. economy. Now, whether or not the is indeed headed for a financial collapse is certainly not supported by economic data. But if enough people begin to act upon their fears, that could definitely affect our economy in a negative manner. Whether or not it would be enough in order to bring down the economy is unknown, but it's highly unlikely. But this is definitely something that I believe is prophetic and will ultimately bring to the forefront the man of sin due to a restructuring of the European Union. I believe that it's going to go from 26 or 28 nations to a core of 10 who will lend their power so that he can work his magic to bring about a new and prosperous European Union. But before that happens, the rapture of the church is going to take place. Now, how far down the road is that? Nobody really knows. No one knows the rapture is going to take place. And nobody knows if and when this will take place, if in fact the economy does collapse. Personally, I believe that when the rapture of the church takes place, I think there's going to be an acceleration that will be brought about by fear, and will in fact accelerate the bringing forth of the man of sin, who indeed will make the world believe that he will take care of this financial mess. So he will be a man of deception, there's no question about that, and will quickly move in and solve the European Union's financial problems, easing fears around the world, and will settle markets down. I believe he will move right into solving this Middle East problem, where he'll bring an umbrella type of agreement between Iran and the rest of the Arab world, in which Israel will also be included, and he will solve this problem regarding the Palestinian state. And it might even go from a 10 to 15 year agreement that Iran has been facing at this time but trying to avoid taking, and it may come down to a 7-year agreement. We'll have to wait and see how that actually comes out. It'll probably be 10 to 15 years at first, but in an extended agreement with Israel and with the Arab nations, it may come down to 7 years. And certainly if you don't know the Lord, you need to make that decision today. This may very well be your last opportunity. And friends, if you have loved ones who are about to be left behind, you need to get them a copy of my Tribulation Period Survival Guide. I have a free version. I also have a paid version, a book in which you can hand right to them. I would recommend that you get a copy of this and get it in their hands as quickly as possible. This book is very important for their survival, but the first thing that it requires is that they come to know the Lord Jesus as Savior. So I would encourage you today to make that purchase for them, hand that to them so they'll have this book in their possession and be able to use it when the time does come. They may not even read it until that day comes, but I guarantee you when the rapture takes place, they'll read every word. So pick up a copy today. This is Terry Malone with the Calvary Prophecy Report.